Okay, so now we've got our final render. Let's take a look at how we can add the final touches in Photoshop. So to start with, let's open up RGB color. And I would hit Ctrl J to make a copy of that. And I would convert that to a smart object. Smart objects are great if you need to update the render later. I'll cover that in another lesson in the bonus section of the course. So let's start by adding a color balance. Now it's looking a little bit red, so I'll bring the cyans down to about -12. So that's looking good, and the good thing with these as layers is that we can turn them on and off. And we can edit them later on. So we'll also add a levels. And bring this in. So that should give it a bit more depth. And we'll also add a curve to give it a bit more depth. I like to add an S curve. So already, if you hold Alt and go to your first image, you can see we're already making great progress. Next up, let's grab our render mask that we did at the end of the last lesson. And we'll drop that on top. This will make it easy for us to select different elements in the scene. So you can grab the magic wand tool and you can select certain areas. Just make sure your tolerance is on 8 and contagious is off. So we can turn that off. We're going to use that later on. So first let's grab our diffuse layer, diffuse filter. Let's drag and drop that on. And hit enter. That will place the object. We can change this to a soft light. And we'll bring it down to 50%. And if there's areas we don't need it, we can add a mask down here. Using the brush tool and making sure we're on black and white. We can right click and select a soft brush and make it a bit smaller. Maybe about 250. And you'll see by painting in black, we're actually painting out the diffuse filter layer. So let's paint out the floor. Other than that, I quite like it. Next up, let's add some depth by adding the AO pass that we did in the last lesson. We'll hit enter and we'll change that to multiply. And we'll bring that down to about 30%. And you'll see that really gives it a bit more depth. And again, along these edges, I don't really like it, so we can use a mask and paint them out. The AO pass really helps with grounding the objects. You can see that they're sitting a lot better. Now let's add a Vray light next. Vray lighting. We'll drag and drop that on. It's actually quite noisy. Yours shouldn't be so noisy. I think I had lower settings on. But if it is, we can just use the filter, noise, reduce noise. And just put it on 10, 45, 25 and hit OK. And we can put that onto a soft light. We'll have it on about 10%. And that looks pretty nice. And we'll do the same with the V-Ray reflection. We'll drag and drop that on and hit enter. And we'll put that on soft light again. and we'll bring that down to about 55. And we can paint out the areas again that we don't want, so maybe the bed's got a bit too dark. So let's apply the mask. And using the bracket buttons on the keyboard, you can make your brush bigger and smaller. And paint out the areas that you think are maybe too dark. Okay, now we'll add the specular. We'll drag and drop that on and hit enter. We'll put that on screen. And we'll put that on about 58. That looks pretty nice. And next we can add some color lookups. So you can just click on one of these and flick through. I actually went through earlier and I found a couple that I liked. Film stock was quite nice. So we can add that and put it on about 50%. And we can add another color lookup. And this time let's add foggy night. Now I'll put a few blues in and we'll bring that down to about 25%. There are a few areas that I think are a bit too dark, so we can add an exposure tweak. And bring this up to about 55. Maybe less, 0.33. And then use the mask to paint out some of the really bright areas. So for these curtains, it would be good to use our render mask. So use the magic wand. And select both of them by holding Shift. And we'll go back to the top. And we'll apply a levels modifier. And then we can just move the middle one just to brighten them up a little bit. So we could probably do a background image in here, nothing too major. Maybe just a bit of sky. So we can do that by selecting our render mask again. And selecting the window. Turn it back off and go to the top of the stack. And add a new layer. And then in the color we can select a blue sky. And we can use gradient to click and drag. Let's add a touch of blue in. I'd actually press Ctrl T and scale that up a little bit. We can go back to our render mask, and using the magic wand tool we can select these areas, and we can actually put a mask onto this. And then using our brush, this time we'll use a hard brush, and we'll bring the size down, and using Shift to click, so hold down Shift and click again and it will draw a straight line. And then I'd use a soft brush again just to paint out over the curtains. So there's just a touch of it in there, and then I'll probably just bring that down as well. So we should probably bring a bit more of that in over the curtains. So if we hit X, that will change the brush to white. So then we can just paint it back in. So it's just a hint of sky really. And now I'd hold Shift and select all the layers. I'd hit Ctrl J to make a duplicate, and then Ctrl E to flatten it. And that will copy everything merged. Now I'd put an image auto color on. And if you hold Ctrl Shift F, and you can actually just bring this back down, and then I'd put it on about 50%. So let's also put an auto contrast on there. And then I'll right click and convert it to a smart object. Then if you go up to filter and camera raw filter, and let's take a look at some of these. Camera raw settings are great. And if we hit auto, let's see what happens. No, that wasn't very good. So let's change the temperature to make it a bit cooler. And bring the exposure up just a touch. Bring the contrast down a little. Bring the highlights up. Let's bring the shadows up. We'll bring some of the whites down. Let's bring the blacks up. And the clarity we can actually bring down. And vibrance down a little bit. And hit OK. And one last thing, this area over here looks a bit oversaturated to me, so if we use the magic wand, we'll go back to our render mask and we'll select the leather bed and back on top of the stack. Let's add a color balance. And let's bring the cyan down to make it fit a little bit better. Okay, so there it is. So if you hold Alt and click the background image, you'll see what we started with. So as you can see, Photoshop is a very powerful tool for adding photorealism to your images. So now let's go to File, Save As. And we'll go to our master bedroom renders. And let's save it as master bedroom. And we can also go File, Save As once that's complete. And we'll choose JPEG. And hit save. And there we have it, there's our final image.